Welcome to KRQE's New Mexico News Insiders. Here's Gabrielle Burkhart and Chris McKee. Sponsored by New Mexico PBS.
So we are going way back in time this week, millions of years, in fact, even before dinosaurs roamed the earth. Some might call it ancient life.
Yes, ancient life, also the name of a new exhibit at the New Mexico Museum of Natural History and Science. It is set to open in January, and some of you may recognize our guest this week. He is the Curator of Paleontology at the New Mexico Museum of Natural History and Science. That is Dr. Spencer Lucas, who's joining us here again on the podcast, but this time in person. We talked to you over Zoom last time. Thanks for being here.
Great to be back, and just meeting you, Chris, has made a difference to me.
Hey, thank you.
You know what I mean?
I haven't had anyone say that to me, so I appreciate it.
High praise.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I guess I should start out. We did have you on the show in January after researchers announced a new study that completely reshaped our understanding of the Tyrannosaurus Rex. And if you haven't heard it, do yourself a favor, go back in the feed, listen to that episode. It was some really fascinating stuff, and one of our good ones, memorable ones, I would say, over the last year for sure here. But we also learned from you just how many ancient fossils have been found in New Mexico. It is a lot, and this new exhibit will also feature hundreds of fossils, as I understand, collected over the past 3 decades from all over the state. So can you tell us a little bit about that? Am I right on with how I described that there?
Right. Well, the new hall, Ancient Life, ancient life is literally a technical term we use called Paleozoic. That means ancient life. And the Paleozoic is an era in Earth history. It's the era before dinosaurs lived. And it goes from about 560 million years to 250. Now, in New Mexico, the oldest fossils we have are about 505 million. So our exhibit's going to cover 505 million, the oldest New Mexican fossils, all the way up to 250 million. And 250 million is the end of the Paleozoic. It's also the biggest extinction in the history of life took place then.
And we talked a little bit about this in the last episode. New Mexico is teeming with fossils. There's just a ton out here.
Yeah, I know. You know, you turn the TV on, you go to the Discovery Channel, Nat Geo, you see Wyoming, Mongolia, places like that. New Mexico's up there. Any paleontologist, I tell people, I've worked in China. You can go to China and talk to Chinese paleontologists about New Mexico fossils. That's how famous they are. They're known worldwide because we have such an extensive and significant fossil record.
Wow. And before we get into some of the new stuff, I want to take us through in a little bit of layers, but I want to also share with people your expertise. So you went to UNM, later received your PhD from Yale University, and according to your bio, it says, I'm going to quote it here, as a paleontologist and stratigrapher. I was like, I should have checked pronunciations. I have the dinosaur names down and then I mess up that one. All right. You specialize in the study of late Paleozoic, Mesozoic, and early Cenozoic vertebrate fossils and continental deposits, particularly in the American Southwest. So for someone needing a translation here, what does that mean you do exactly?
It means that I'm interested in fossils that range in age from about 300 million to about 50 million. And I have worked in other places, but given the rich fossil record of New Mexico and that we are the Natural History Museum for New Mexico, I've done a tremendous amount of work here. And I'd also like to say I've worked in the parts of Arizona, Colorado, Utah, and Texas that really should be part of New Mexico. We should have their fossils.
Interesting. Why do you say that?
Because I want fossils.
Okay.
No, I've often said, in the Civil War, Texas tried to conquer New Mexico. Why don't we conquer part of Texas now just to have their fossils?
Wow.
Yeah, maybe the governor should, weigh in on that.
Huh. There's clearly
There's
just
a
a
headline.
lot. Yeah. There's a lot to unpack there. But I mean, really, though, I guess, what you're saying is that the fossils around in those areas probably tie in very well to what we can find here within the state.
Well, and the fossils don't know the state boundaries. So, if you go to Gallup and you start looking at the rocks and fossils, and before you know it, you're in Arizona.
Yeah. as I understand the new space here, it is a reimagining of sorts, replacing the museum's old Origins Hall and the first renovation of this exhibit space since 1987. Can you tell us about the process of putting this exhibit together? That's a long time coming to replace, a hall that had been there for as long as the Origins Hall, it sounds like. How much construction was involved? How much work was put into this new Ancient Life exhibit?
A lot of work by a lot of people. So what we did initially is when we decided we were going to build a hall, we demolished the old Origins Hall. So we went in, we took the fossils and the objects on display out, and then literally it was just a demolition project, taking walls down, etc. When we stripped everything, we ended up with a room that's about 3,000 square feet, and that's the room where the exhibit will be. But then, of course, we had to start building the exhibit space, which means we had to build new walls, platforms, cases. We had to get new electrical work done. We don't have floor covering yet. We're going to carpet the hall. That's coming. So there's just a big, what you might think of almost like a home remodel construction phase. You're building this exhibit room. And of course, the other thing we're doing while that's happening is we're picking all the fossils and other objects we'll put on display. I wrote the first draft of all the words that are going to be in display, and then our educators and exhibitors go through the text, modify it, edit it as they see fit. And we're almost at the point where their exhibits staff is about to put all the cases in the hall, and then they will start populating them with the fossils.
Wow. How proud of you are, you of the work that your team has done and you've been able to see come through? Because, since 1987, I was born in 85, I can tell you, it's been a lot of years, I guess is what I'm trying to say, since the Origins Hall went into play, to be able to finally replace something that it feels like it's a once-in-a-career opportunity.
Oh, yeah, I'm beyond proud. I'm amazed. I'm amazed at the talents that we have on staff, the artists, the designers, the carpenters. We have some really remarkable people working at the museum. And I think from our exhibits, they're very high quality. Just the craftsmanship and the aesthetic is very high. And these people are really good. The other thing that's really good about some of them is they want to understand the science. So it's not enough to hand them a fossil and say, okay, put this on display. They want to talk to me about it. They want me to send them technical literature so they can better understand. Because, when you take a fossil and you're going to put it on display, it's not like every side is as good as every side. There's a certain side you want to see. There's certain things you want to see. So yeah, for me, I've wanted to build this hall personally since the 90s. And it's taken about a little over 25 years for us to finally get to it. So I'm glad it came.
We'll be right back with more of the New Mexico News Insiders.
Hi, I'm Monica Wicki, host of New Mexico Living. This episode of New Mexico News Insiders is sponsored by New Mexico PBS. If you enjoy New Mexico News Insiders, check out New Mexico in Focus, a great source for insights about what's happening in our state. Catch their podcasts and videos at nmpbs.org or stream it anytime, anywhere on the free PBS app. Now, let's continue to New Mexico News Insiders.
One of the cool things that I read about this new exhibit is that it will bring a lot of the oldest fossils out of research collections, private research collections, into public view for the very first time. So to tell a story about our state, even during the 300 million years before dinosaurs began walking the earth, which is just wild to think about. Can you tell us more about that?
Right. Well, we have some of the oldest fossils ever found in New Mexico that are going to be in the hall. And then we have a whole string of fossils to cover that whole time interval. And it's a very complicated story because you begin with different kinds of seas. In New Mexico 500 million years ago, there was dry land, but as far as we know, very little lived on land back then. And so all the fossils we have were living in a shallow sea that was largely in southern New Mexico. So you get this history of different seas. The sea was in and out of New Mexico many times during the Paleozoic. Then we have the stories of what went on land. A little later, we start to get fossil plants, fossil amphibians, fossil reptiles. We even have fossil cockroaches in the exhibit. And I have to tell you, fossil cockroaches look like cockroaches. I always say, when I see a fossil cockroach, it looks just like a cockroach on the heel of my shoe.
Okay.
You know,
They haven't changed much.
they're living fossils. I mean, they're an amazing group of animals that have been around for hundreds of millions of years. So what we're doing is we're going through this whole time interval, showing people the different environments, the different animals and plants that lived in them. So we go from these really oldest seas to seashores, to jungles, to deserts, to newer seashores, to giant reefs. So it's a very complicated exhibit. All of our other paleontology halls only cover like 50 or maybe 80 million years of time. This is covering, 250 million. And it's a very complicated 250 million. But the beauty of it is we have a large collection of fossils from this time interval. We're going to have about 300 real fossils in the hall, which is a substantial number. And they are New Mexican fossils that our visitors can see. And I want people to understand the whole long, complex history of New Mexico during this time interval, both in terms of the life forms that lived and the environments and how and why they changed.
Yeah. So
Very cool.
I understand some of the things that people will be able to see are even creatures that existed around the time, including the oldest tree climbing reptile, the Eoscancer. Hopefully I said that right, which is the oldest discovered fossil in New Mexico, right?
No, it's not the oldest discovered. It is the oldest tree climbing reptile in the world.
Okay.
Yeah, the Eoscancer is about 300 million. So we have fossils in the hall that'll be up to 500 million. But Eoscancer, we have the skeleton of this little lizard-like tree climber. And I mean little, I'm talking about an animal that was about this long. And we have the skeleton of this animal. It has these very distinctive claws and limbs that indicate it was a tree climber. So it's the first evidence anybody ever saw that climbing, which is not easy, had evolved by about 300 million years. Before we discovered that fossil, people thought the tree climbers were a bit younger, maybe 270 million. So we were able to kind of push back that history. And that animal, that actual fossil, it's like a little kitten, size thing, will be in the hall.
Can you explain for us non-experts of how do you date a fossil? Like, what is the process to know how old something is?
We know how old they are from all sorts of data that occur in the rocks with the fossil. So sometimes we have an actual number. We have a volcanic ash bed, and through chemical analysis, we can get like, this is 300 million. But mostly what we know is we know the succession of life forms in many parts of the rock column. And we know that certain animals lived at certain times. And that's not just established in New Mexico. It could be established worldwide or over a broader region. So if we find the fossil of that animal, and we know that it only lived during this time interval, or we think it did, then we know we're in that time interval.
And you do carbon dating to some of this as well, I would imagine?
Well, okay, yeah. Not really carbon dating. Carbon dating only works well back to about 20 or 30,000 years ago. So almost all carbon dating is done for archaeology and very young fossils. The kind of dating that would be done in these rocks would be uranium-lead dating, maybe argon or potassium-argon. You're talking about, like when you talk about carbon dating, you're talking about radioactive carbon becoming nitrogen. So we're looking for radioactive elements. And the trouble is carbon rolls over to nitrogen in just a few thousand years. We need something like uranium that'll take millions of years to change into lead. You know what I mean? We need a longer term clock.
Yes, that makes sense. Okay.
Interesting. Will there be like any replications? I know that you have those for like the dinosaurs at the museum. Will there be replications of these creatures based on some of the existing fossils? For instance, will people be able to visualize how big or small these animals were?
Oh yeah, what you're calling replications, we have some sculptures of these animals. We only have skeletons, but we can reasonably, with good science, estimate, what these animals look like. Then we're going to have a lot of artwork in the hall, and artwork of individual animals and plants, and then we have some murals that'll be in there that show the overall environment. Yeah, I mean, I'm very conscious, and I think our staff is, of the idea that most people don't look at fossils day in, day out. So when you put a bunch of bones or you put some shells in front of somebody, they may say, oh, that's nice, but it makes a bigger impact. It means a lot more to the visitor if you can actually see what we think the whole animal looked like or what environment it lived in.
Yeah,
For sure.
When you add that context, it can really mean a lot more to something.
Right, and you have to remember what I said, that we're very big. A big part of this hall is the changing environments, all the very different, from seafloors to deserts that we encounter in Paleozoic New Mexico.
Yeah. So as an expert, is there a particular artifact that, or maybe is there something that really stands out to you as special with this new exhibit? Is there something that you're just like, I'm so proud to see this, I'm glad we're going to have that out there?
Well, you already mentioned one, Eoscancer, because, that's an absolutely unique fossil. That animal has never been found elsewhere at this point. So if you want to see Eoscancer, the real thing, you're going to have to come here. And another one that is high on my list is an animal called Gordodon. And Gordodon is a sail-backed reptile, these animals with the sailbacks. We discovered it near Alamogordo. And originally I wanted to name it Gordodon after Alamogordo, but it also had a big fat tooth at the front of its mouth. And you know that gordo means fat in Spanish.
Right.
So this Gordodon we have part of the skeleton of this animal. We have the skull and the sail and all that. And that too is absolutely unique. And it's like Eoscancer, it set a record. It's the oldest plant-eating reptile of its type that was ever known. So we've had good luck, you could say, in finding, I would say, world-class, totally unique and scientifically important fossils in New Mexico, like the two I mentioned, and there are others, and they're going to be in this hall. We're not holding back. We want New Mexicans to really see how important and unique our Paleozoic rock and fossil record is.
Who gets to name these?
The scientists do it. I mean, I was involved in both Eoscancer and Gordodon with others, co-authors, and we decide on the name, and that's kind of fun. Yeah, it's kind of like, you get to name your baby,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
And your fossil baby gets a scientific name.
We'll be right back with more on New Mexico News Insiders.
Hi, I'm Logan Rader, host of New Mexico Living. New Mexico News Insiders is sponsored by New Mexico PBS.
If you like New Mexico News Insiders, learn more about New Mexico in Focus, a weekly hour-long show analyzing decisions impacting New Mexico statewide. Stream it anytime, anywhere. Visit nmpbs.org and follow them on all social media platforms.
Now back to New Mexico News Insiders.
I'm also curious, what was the catalyst for, you said you were hoping to do this since the 90s and it's taken 20 plus years. What was the catalyst to finally be able to get this going? It sounds like there was a lot of players that had to be involved, right?
Well, yeah, right. And we had kind of fooled around or planned to build this exhibit for some years. The catalyst was the director who came a couple of years ago who very much wanted to build the museum, and then the money, which we got. The head of our, the museums are in, the state museums are in an agency called the Department of Cultural Affairs. And our cabinet secretary, Deborah Garcia and Griego, offered to provide money to build the exhibit. So, you can have a wonderful exhibit idea, but if you don't have the money, you're not there. So we had not gotten the money in the past and really done enough. And we had some of the previous directors during that 25 years were interested in building it. But the current director, Tony Fiorella, was very much committed. Let's build this thing. And the other thing is, you have to remember that the master design of most of the Natural History Museum is a walk through time. It's a walk through New Mexico's geologic, biological history. Sure. So the other motivation here is this fills in a 250 million year chunk of the walk through time that we had not covered.
Wow. What do you hope people will ultimately learn and take away from walking through the Ancient Life exhibit?
I think, to me, the biggest message is just how much things change. And people will sit there and say, well, the earth is pretty constant. It's not true. The continents are drifting. They're moving all around. We're going to show that in a big way in the exhibit. And then you will get a real sense that, if you were at 500 million, it was this environment in New Mexico. There were trilobites crawling around on seafloors. When I get to 400 or 300 million, I've got jungles full of ancient cockroaches and reptiles and amphibians and all. It's a real, like I said, it's a kaleidoscope. And that's what I want people to grasp, that, New Mexico now is a high desert. almost 1,000 miles from the ocean, almost a mile or more in the sky, if you look at altitude. Not so during the Paleozoic. New Mexico was many, many different environments, very different than today.
So we are recording this episode here in early December. When can people start seeing this ancient life?
Well, our hope is we're definitely going to open it early next year. We haven't decided on a date. We've been talking about opening it probably in middle-ish January. We will announce the date soon because, of course, we want people to know.
For sure.
And everybody will be able to come see it in literally a couple of months at most.
And then how long will it be around?
Well, it's a permanent exhibit. The exhibit it replaced was around for almost 40 years.
Right.
So I don't know. The problem is that science changes. We learn more and things change. So I'm going to guess it'll minimally be around for 20 years. And 20 years from now, when you're my age, something like that.
Yeah.
No, you won't be my age in 20 years.
Chris did out his birth year.
I did date myself, 85.
Yeah, I know.
So.
Can you believe he told all of New Mexico how old he is? It's incredible.
All right.
40's coming fast for me.
Yeah.
So.
Anyway, we're hoping that I'm sure it'll be around for 20 years, but the people who are at the museum in 20 years will look at it and they'll decide how dated is the science. Does it just need a facelift, a remodel, or maybe priorities will be to build a totally new hall.
Wow, that's so cool.
Yeah.
So for us, we haven't seen it yet, obviously. Excited to walk through it, but can you give people a visual picture? We've been talking about, like, what did New Mexico look like before the dinosaurs roamed the earth? Can you give anyone any sort of visual? Like, what did New Mexico look like?
Sure. So let's talk, if we talk from about 400 to 500 million, there was a sea, various seas that only went maybe as far north as Truth or Consequences. So north of that, New Mexico was dry land. In the earlier part of that interval, 500 to 400, we don't think much was living on land. And I mean globally. So probably it was just a rocky landscape. But by about 400 million, the first forests appeared. So, and you have to remember, at this time, New Mexico is virtually at sea level. I mean, part of it's below sea level in the southern part of the state. It's also, in the continental drift story, New Mexico is south of the equator at that time. It's well south of the equator, and it's drifting northward. So then things really start to change around 300 million or so, because one of the things that happens is the continents all come together to form what we call a supercontinent. And when they do, New Mexico is almost smack dab on the equator. It's west. It's in the western end of the continent. What I would say is New Mexico was in the tropics. It was equatorial. So the state was, I always say, if you flew over New Mexico about 300 million years ago, it would be like flying over parts of Indonesia or the Philippines. This state was an archipelago of islands. There were shallow seas, there were mountains, and the mountains were covered in jungles. Wow. And so it's, it's a very different place.
Yeah. It's incredible.
Is there anything else we're missing that you want people to better understand about just what went into this exhibit, or what you want people to take away from even this conversation?
Well, I think, not to put too much of a plug into it, but this is exactly what the Natural History Museum is doing for the citizens of New Mexico. We're here to educate people about the natural history of our state. So the beauty of this exhibit is we're going to teach you about 250 million years of New Mexico history in 3,000 square feet. And I don't know how long it'll take you to go through it, but I guess just to go through it and get a good feel will be a couple of hours, and you'll probably want to come back and study things more.
Yeah.
I'm a slow museum walker myself.
Yeah, I can appreciate the idea of like being able to go back there. Just like, there's a lot of families out there that have zoo passes. You keep coming back and spending different times with different animals. You can do the same thing with the museums here in New Mexico as well. And it sounds like a great opportunity to do that for sure.
Well, Dr. Lucas, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate your expertise in chatting with us.
My pleasure, and I'm hoping everybody will look for that date when we advertise it and come see our new exhibit next year.
Absolutely.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Again, a special thanks to Dr. Spencer Lucas of the New Mexico Museum of Natural History and Science for joining us on this episode. We were talking offline here, and one of the things that just constantly strikes me about this conversation is that when you think about how old some of this stuff is, you realize just what a blip your life is on the existence of the great timeline, as they say, of Earth.
Yeah, you can look at a fossil and it really gives you a perspective of your own mortality. Not to get like too dark, but it really is fascinating to be able to walk through, like he said, a 250 million year lifespan that we have never seen, but can get at least an idea of what it was like before the dinosaurs.
Yeah, we're not here for all that long, folks, so live it up. YOLO, as they say.
I'm sure Dr. Lucas will appreciate that. But if you all have any story ideas or people you'd like to hear from on our show, always feel free to reach out. I'm Gabrielle.Burkhart@krqe.com via email and gburknm on social media.
And I'm Chris.McKee at krqe.com, also at Chris McKee TV. And if you're watching this on Fox New Mexico, don't forget, you can watch the full extended conversation on krqe.com/podcasts or our KRQE YouTube page. Thanks for listening and watching.